This is a 2A Productions.
I had a dream the other night that, well, I didn't understand. A figure walked in through the mist with a flintlock in his hand. His clothes were torn and dirty as he stood there by my bed. He took off his three-cornered hat, and speaking low to me, he said, "We fought a revolution to secure our liberty. We wrote the Constitution as a shield from tyranny. For future generations, this legacy we gave. In this, the land of the free, and home of the brave. The freedoms we secured for you, we'd hoped you'd always keep. But tyrants labored endlessly while your parents were asleep. Your freedom's gone, your courage lost, you're no more than a slave. In this, the land of the free, and home of the brave. You buy permits to travel and permits to own a gun, permits to start a business or to build a place for one. On land that you believe you own, you pay a yearly rent, although you have no voice in saying how the money's spent. Your children must attend a school that doesn't educate, and your Christian values can't be taught according to the state. You read about the current news in a regulated press, and you pay a tax you do not owe to please the IRS. Your money is no longer made of silver nor of gold. You trade your wealth for paper so your life can be controlled. You pay for crimes that make our nation turn from God and shame. You've taken Satan's number. You've traded in your name. You've given government control to those who do you harm so they could burn down churches and seize the family farm and keep our country deep in debt, put men of God in jail, harass your fellow countrymen while corrupted courts prevail. Your public servants don't uphold the solemn oaths they've sworn, and your daughters visit doctors so their children won't be born. Your leaders send artillery and guns to foreign shores and send your sons to slaughter fighting other people's wars. Can you regain the freedoms for which we fought and died? Or don't you have the courage or the faith to stand with pride? And are there no more values for which you'll fight to save? Or do you wish your children to live in fear and be a slave? O sons of the Republic, arise, take a stand. Defend the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. Preserve our great republic and each God-given right. And pray to God to keep the torch of freedom burning bright. As I awoke, he'd vanished in the mist from whence he came. His words were true. We are not free, but we have ourselves to blame. For even now as tyrants trample each God-given right, we only watch and tremble, too afraid to stand and fight. If he stood by your bedside in a dream while you were asleep and wondered what remains of the freedoms he'd fought to keep, what would be your answer if he called out from the grave, "Is this still the land of the free and home of the brave?" God bless you, and God bless this republic.
December 15th, 1791. The first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, was ratified by the states. The great American experiment was underway. The notion that people would govern themselves was unprecedented. There were no models, no examples to choose from. For the first time, men enacted into law human rights, not just government-given rights. The authors deemed those rights so important, they made a provision to protect those rights so they could never be taken away. The Second Amendment.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Time and time again, history replays itself. Unarmed civilizations fall prey to tyrannical leaders. To ensure the balance of power remains in the hands of the people, the framers of the Second Amendment crafted 27 words. One sentence. To succinctly and definitively protect our freedoms from controlling political groups, oppressive religious organizations, or from an abusive government. None of those carefully chosen 27 words are unusual. The sentence is straightforward and crystal clear. There is no mention of limitations or restrictions on the type of arms citizens can carry. There is no mention of gun control. No distinction between sporting use and military use. No language regarding handguns, shotguns, rifles, or even weaponry not yet imagined. What the authors of the Second Amendment did specify is the right of the people, not privilege, to keep and bear arms. Yet, for more than 200 years, those 27 words and their intended meaning have been debated. What's the debate? We, the people, will decide. Here are 6 facts every American must know about the Second Amendment, often referred to as 2A. Fact number 1. The framers of the Bill of Rights believed in God. They fought for the freedom from religious persecution. They believed the right to self-defense is a fundamental God-given right that existed long before the creation of any government. In fact, written documents pertaining to self-preservation predate the Second Amendment by thousands of years. Reference to the right to freedom from violent harm and the right to self-defense is found in the Torah and Christian Bible in Exodus 22, verse 2. In Jewish law, the Talmud states, if someone comes to kill you, arise quickly and kill him. Roman Catholic doctrine has long asserted,
someone who defends his life is not guilty of murder, even if he is forced to deal his aggressor a lethal blow.
Protestant theologian Samuel Rutherford writes in his 1644 publication Lex Rex,
Because no king or civil power can take away nature's birthright of self-defense from any man or a community of men.
even the Declaration of Independence, written 15 years before the Second Amendment was ratified, clearly states,
All human beings are endowed with certain unalienable rights, and that governments are created to protect those rights.
So, what exactly is an unalienable right? A right that cannot be transferred or taken away. Fact number 2.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
The language of the Second Amendment prohibits the federal government from infringing on the rights of the people. As clear as the First Amendment's language of prohibiting Congress from infringing on the right of the people to religious expression, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press, the Second Amendment is also clearly a protector of rights. Former Texas legislator Dr. Susanna Hupp knows infringement firsthand. Her parents were brutally gunned down in a Texas cafeteria by a lone gunman.
Reported subject shot 15 shots into the...
The only thing that the gun laws did that day in Texas was keep people like me from being able to protect myself and my family.
Due to a Texas state law prohibiting the carrying of firearms, the handgun that may have saved her parents' lives remained in her car.
As odd as this may sound to you, I wasn't angry at the madman that did this, but I was mad as hell at my legislators because they had legislated me out of the right to protect myself and my family.
Fact number 3.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state.
The Second Amendment refers to a well-regulated militia. The right of the people to form citizen militias was unquestioned by the founders. Alexander Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers number 28, expressed,
When a government betrays the people by amassing too much power and becoming tyrannical, the people have no choice but to exercise their original right of self-defense, to fight the government.
In the Federalist Papers number 46, James Madison, the father of the Bill of Rights, argues,
The ultimate authority resides in the people, and that if the federal government got too powerful and overstepped its authority, then the people would develop plans of resistance and resort to arms.
Some interpret today's National Guard as the well-regulated militia, but the founders opposed anything but a small national military.
There are some people that think that that phrase in the Second Amendment has an entirely different meaning.
The phrase well-regulated refers to a well-trained, prepared, and disciplined citizens' militia.
They seem to think that it means just the state National Guard, and they don't know their history. That's just not true.
The phrase was in common use in 1791 and for more than a century afterwards. The Oxford English Dictionary from that time period defines well-regulated as something that was calibrated correctly, functioning as expected. Fact number 4.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people.
Further evidence that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state does not refer to the National Guard is supported by recent research. The writing style of the late 18th century legal documents typically began with a preamble. The purpose of the preamble was to state a purpose, not a limitation. New Hampshire's Constitution, written in 1784, begins with a preamble. The liberty of the press is essential to the security of freedom in a state. It ought therefore to be inviolably preserved. The Constitution has a preamble.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic trade.
The Bill of Rights has a preamble.
The conventions of a number of the states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution, expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added.
Since a preamble states a purpose,
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people.
the well-regulated militia only reinforces the importance of the individual right to keep and carry arms.
The Second Amendment, when it really comes down to it, I believe it has two primary meanings. One is the obvious ability for me to be able to protect myself and my family from bad guys. But there's another meaning that the founders put in place that I think is absolutely vital to our way of life in this country. It's the ability for all of us out here to be able to protect ourselves from a government that could become tyrannical.
Fact number 5. Before the war between the states, some states enacted laws that made it illegal for slaves and freed African Americans to possess firearms. In the infamous Dred Scott case, the Supreme Court ruled in 1857 that people of African ancestry could not claim U.S. citizenship, essentially taking away the right of African Americans to own a gun. In truth, armed slaves would be able to retaliate against their owners. Ironically, even though the framers of the Second Amendment feared becoming slaves to their government, some were tragically willing to permit slavery. Now that slavery is abolished, all citizens of all races should enjoy the Second Amendment's legal protection. Fact number 6. Over the past 60 years, the interpretation of the term well-regulated militia has come under fire from the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeal and many lower court judges. Those judges have wrongly ruled that the right to keep and bear arms doesn't apply to individuals, but have wrongly interpreted militia to mean the National Guard. But the words well-regulated militia had a far different meaning at the time the Second Amendment was written. In today's world, well-regulated is associated with intense government regulation. At the time the Second Amendment was drafted, the term didn't need to be defined. Colonial militias had been in existence for 150 years. With the exception of millers, ferrymen, and slaves, every adult male was required to join. It was your duty to report for service 4 to 6 times a year. You were required to have your own musket, bayonet, ammunition, and knapsack. If you were unable to supply your own firearm, the militia would provide you with one. Militias were well organized, well regulated, with the men reporting to an appointed captain. Not only did you have the right to own a firearm, it was your duty. Although the Constitution gave Congress the power to raise and support a temporary army, the framers feared a standing army after the Revolutionary War. The overriding purpose of the Second Amendment in guaranteeing the right of the people to keep and bear arms was to maintain a check on the standing army. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, meant ultimate power must be in the hands of the people. The Second Amendment is very specific about this. It is the right of the people, not the states, to keep and bear arms. Recently, the Supreme Court confirmed this view in the District of Columbia versus Heller, finding the right to keep and bear arms an individual right held by the people, not a collective right, as it's been interpreted previously. The court concluded,
Americans have an individual right to possess a firearm unconnected with service in a militia, and to use that arm for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home.
Without a doubt, the Supreme Court decision is a victory. Portions of the court document affirm the facts. The individual right to self-defense. Individual rights shall not be infringed. The correct interpretation of a well-regulated militia. But other portions of that same court document contradict the facts.
Like most rights, the Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, and for whatever purpose.
Clearly, the controversy is not over. The decision speaks from both sides of the mouth and leaves the door wide open to misinterpretation.
I think it opens it up for all kinds of regulations and registrations of guns that I think do not bode well for the future of the Second Amendment.
Lower courts are likely to interpret the doublespeak and uphold prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons. Lower courts are likely to interpret the doublespeak and uphold laws imposing conditions and restrictions on the sale of firearms. Lower courts are likely to interpret the doublespeak and uphold bans on dangerous and unusual weapons, which could include any weapon the court wants it to be. The debate over the Second Amendment is far from over. Ultimately, we, the people, must decide what's more important, our unalienable rights or what the Supreme Court decides are our rights. So what is it every American should know? Gun control laws have been in existence for hundreds of years. Gun control infringes on individual rights that have been in existence for thousands of years. Gun control is necessary when one group of people wants to control or dominate another group of people. Gun control is usually popularized by myth.
You know, we constantly hear these myths about gun control out there. There's a myth that gun control saves lives. I'm a perfect example of the fact that that isn't true. There's a myth that we'd be safer with fewer guns. We have to have guns in the right hands. There's a myth that countries with gun control laws have lower crime. There's a myth that carrying concealed weapons leads to higher crime and accident rates. It's not true. And registering guns, in my opinion, it's always the precursor to confiscation, which means that I can't protect myself or my family.
There is much evidence that proves more guns in the hands of more law-abiding citizens actually deters crime and lowers the homicide rate. Registering guns does little to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Many cities with the strictest gun control laws often have the highest crime rate per capita. When criminals have guns and law-abiding citizens are disarmed, who are the gun control laws really protecting?
It's about rights, and as long as you are exercising your right in a responsible manner, I don't think we should be placing regulations upon how you exercise that right.
We, the people, have the unalienable self-right to defend and protect ourselves. We, the people, have the unalienable individual right to pick up arms to secure a free state. We, the people, have the unalienable right to possess and own any weapon we choose. From muskets to military-style weapons, the Second Amendment protects that right.
One of the great things about the ability to keep and bear arms is that ultimately, as long as we have that ability, ultimately the people will have the power and make the decisions.
U and 2A. Good for the USA.
Now I'm going to talk about the militia. How many in here are in the militia? I am. I'm not afraid to admit it. Okay, I'm going to talk about the militia. If you're not in the militia, you need to be. If you are in the militia, you need to reorganize your thinking, because I guarantee you've got the wrong concept of what the militia is, and you're probably operating illegally, unlawfully, unethically, and probably maybe even immorally. And I say that based upon past experience with other militias around the country, not knowing anything about your militia. Now, what's wrong with a militia? Nothing. That's right. What is the militia?
Everybody capable of defending the Constitution.
That's correct. That was the concept in the founding of this nation, was that the people would act as their own defense. That there would never be a standing army. Why? Because they saw what standing armies could do to a civilian population, to enslave them, destroy them in Europe. And they wanted to start what? A new world. They want to get rid of all of that stuff. So they gave us freedom. It's a great gift. They knew we would probably throw it away, but they wanted to give us all the tools to make sure that we could keep it if we really deserved it. And if we did, and we could hang on to it responsibly and not give it away in exchange for some imagined security or benefit from a big central government or a king or something like that, that would be the new world. Okay? A lot of people think that when I tell them what our founding fathers really were, that I'm attacking them, and that if they really were that, they wouldn't have given us freedom and all this kind of stuff. Baloney. They understood human nature. They gave us our freedom, knowing that human nature is to give it up in exchange for a promised security, even if it means we have to go into slavery. Because they understood what it took me a long time to figure out, because I really didn't understand all this in the beginning either. And usually I find the true answer by just looking within myself. Don't we usually spend the first 20 years of our life trying to get away from home and become free and responsible? Doesn't everybody, their big dream is, gee, I'll be glad when I'm out of Daddy's house and I can go where I want to and I don't have to be in by midnight and I can drive my car, and, you know, isn't that true? How many of you think that's true? Good. And isn't it also true that once we get out there and understand what's really required and how responsible we are and how hard it is, we spend the rest of our life trying to find somebody that'll take care of us? Isn't that true? Isn't that why a lot of guys go in the military? Oh, I'm leaving home and it's a hard world out there. No, I'm going in the service. They'll give me a bed and food and all that kind of stuff and send me around the world, and I get to see everybody, have a girl at every port, and boy, it's fine, huh?
Suddenly you feel that you're lost, that there's no place left for you to go.
I used to. That was before the Army became my home.
Oh? Really?
Sure. Think about it. The Army feeds you, clothes you, gives you a place to sleep. Every guy in khaki is family.
Oh, that's beautiful, Joey.
The Army is beautiful.
To the Army.
And then you find out what that is. It's socialism. And some guys love it and they stay in for life. Some of them even convince themselves that they're doing great service for their country, which is what I was involved in, convincing myself that I was doing great service for my country. It was my plan to stay in the military forever until I figured it all out, saw what was really going on. When they made a mistake and put me in the Office of Naval Intelligence and I became the briefing team member for Admiral Bernard Clary and got to see the truth, I said, whoa, I'm leaving. And I was gone. That's why you can't depend upon these guys sitting around the VFW and the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion halls to help us in this battle. They spent their life in the military. They are socialists. All they give a damn about, and I don't care if it pisses you off if you're one of them, because it's the truth. And I'll stand and duke it out with you face to face over it if you want to. It's the truth. The only thing they give a damn about is sitting around in those halls, getting drunk and telling lies about how brave they are and getting their retirement check every month. They have been trained to be socialists, and they are going to be good little socialists forever. Okay? It's the truth. Absolute truth. Anybody who's receiving a government check is not going to help us in this battle. That includes old folks on Medicare and everything else. If you can't turn around and walk away from it now, you're not going to help us in this battle. You have been socialized. Sorry if it makes you angry, but it's true, because you're not going to do anything to jeopardize your little checky-wecky, right? But the truth is, free people don't get little checky-weckies from Big Brother. They don't do it. And Social Security is not an insurance policy. It's a hook. It's a hook, along with all the rest of these benefits and things. You cannot accept the benefit from Big Brother without enslaving yourself in the process, okay? Now, I know I've just really severely made some of you angry, but I promised you I would do that when I came in, and I never, ever go back on my promise. So I want you to think about that. Let's get back to the subject at hand, militias. Militias are absolutely necessary to a free people. The Founding Fathers knew this. They couldn't ignore it even if they wanted to because the people knew it. Who was it that stopped the Redcoats when they went to seize the arms at Lexington?
The militia.
The militia. How were they described by the British commander? We marched to the bridge and were met by a group of farmers with guns who drew up in a somewhat military order and opposed us. That's how they were described. They weren't military people. They were farmers. Who can call up the militia? Traditionally in this country, any responsible person could call forth the militia for any responsible reason. It's still that way today. Is the National Guard the militia? Well, no, you're wrong. It is the militia of the federal United States. You see, the National Guard cannot ever be the militia of the state. Why? Because it violates all the rules. It can be federalized and therefore could never stand in defense of the state against a central government turned despotic or tyrannical.
Whoa, shots fired, shots fired! They told me to shoot.
Newly released video shows a member of the Minnesota National Guard opening fire on a civilian driver out past curfew in the days following George Floyd's killing.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
Therefore, the National Guard cannot be the militia. It also violates the other rules. Who trains the officers of the National Guard? The regular Army. The United States trains those officers. To be militia, the officers must be trained by the state, don't they? Okay. So the National Guard is not the militia of the state. It is the militia of the United States. That's true. There's also another militia of the United States. It's the unorganized militia of the United States of America. And who is that? It's everybody between the ages of 17 and 45 who are capable of serving in the capacity of a militiaman. The law specifically says men and boys. Who cannot be in the unorganized militia of the United States of America? The Vice President, the President, any elected officer cannot be a member. National Guard cannot be a member. Any member of the military forces of the United States of America cannot be a member of the militia. Why? Because they're under control of the very people who could subvert the government and become a tyrant to the people, aren't they? And the purpose of the militia is to prevent that. The militia has three functions. What are they? Who can name them off? There's only three. Repel invasion, suppress insurrection, and enforce the laws of the Union. Actually, it says execute the laws of the Union. Repel invasion, suppress insurrection, and execute the laws of the Union. Why does it say execute the laws of the Union instead of obey the President? If the President tears up the Constitution and becomes a tyrant, it's up to the militia to enforce the laws of the Union and arrest the President, isn't it? That's the function of the militia. The same in the state. Any state, the function of the militia is to repel invasion, suppress insurrection, execute the laws of the state, and any other constitutional lawful purpose to which the governor may call them up to perform. What is a lawful militia? Can you put together a bunch of guys and say we're the militia? Can you? The white shirt? Yes. That's right. But you have to say they're militia? They're already the militia. You are the militia. You don't even have to get together. You're the militia. You can get together with anybody else in here who is the militia or who wants to volunteer to be a member of the militia, and you can form a unit of the unorganized militia of the state, or if the Constitution of the state specifies it, the constitutional militia of the state, like they do in Texas, the constitutional militia of Texas, okay? And you can get together and you can have meetings and you can train and you can prepare to function as militiamen. Is this lawful? Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's nobody who can do anything to stop you. Can you appoint yourself colonel and become commander of the militia?
You have to be elected, don't you?
In the absence of appointment of rank by the governor of your state, officers must be elected by the militia. So you elect your officers. You cannot appoint yourself, and nobody can appoint you. The militia elects the officers, and they're elected to serve in those capacities for certain periods of time. During a lawful, organized training exercise, you give an order which somebody disobeys, can they be punished? Not only can be, must be. Must be. If you don't, what do you have? You have anarchy. You don't have a militia. And the first time you go into battle, you're going to have people doing what they want to do instead of what they have to do to win that battle, don't you? So it's not can, but must be. Must be in every instance. When they elect you to be an officer, your order was lawful and right under the circumstances, they must obey that order. If they don't, you must have some system set up to punish that member or expel that member from the militia body.
In the future, full quarter will be given to British wounded and any who surrender.
The British men of war gave no such quarter when it fired on a ship carrying my wife and daughters.
You have my sympathy, but my order stands.
Damn your sympathy.
We're militia. This is not regular army. Every man here is free to come and go as he pleases. But while you're here, you will obey my command, or I will have you shot.
What body of rules governs the militia? Uniform Code of Military Justice. And every lawfully formed militia must have a copy of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And everybody must understand how it operates. Must militia members be under oath? Absolutely. If they cannot take an oath of loyalty to the Constitution of the United States of America and of their state, how can you trust them? How can you trust them? The answer is you cannot. Can you substitute an affirmation for an oath? An affirmation is as legally binding as an oath. It's the truth. If somebody says, I can't take an oath on religious grounds, can you accept them? You can take them if they agree to take an affirmation. If they refuse to take the affirmation on religious grounds, can you accept them? No! The militia is not a religious organization. It's a military organization, and you must be able to trust the members of the militia. And if they cannot be under oath or affirmation, you cannot trust them. You cannot accept them. You cannot have them in your organization. Period. Cut and dried, no. Can you accept a convicted felon in a militia organization? No. Why not? Bad character? What if he paid for his crime and he's never done anything bad again? He can't own a weapon. Now there's two reasons why you can't do this. Number one, he cannot own or be in possession of a weapon. So you're jeopardizing this person's life if you let them come around weapons and they're seen or a photograph is taken with them just touching a weapon. They could go back to prison, and you don't want that to happen to them. Okay? Aside from the fact that they can't own a weapon, can't use a weapon, touch a weapon, or hold a weapon, which means they have to function in some administrative capacity, there is a liability propaganda-wise. If the press finds out you have convicted felons in your militia, what are they going to do? They're going to rake you over the coals, and you don't need that. So what you do is you put these people in reserve, and you say you are not an active part of this militia. You are, by law of the land, a member of the militia, though you can't take part in our unit. If war breaks out, you come running and we'll give you a gun, because then it won't matter whether you have a gun or not, right? That's how you treat those people. Don't make them feel bad because they committed a crime or did something wrong in their life and paid the price for it, because I can assure you, everybody in this room has done something wrong at some point in their life. Most of us have determined we're not going to do it again. What kind of exercises can you do with a militia? You can have any kind of militia you want to, as long as you state it that you are that type of militia and that you have certain goals and purposes in your training exercises. You can have a militia of artillery. Did you know that? You can have a militia of armor. You can have a transportation company or battalion. You can be a militia company or battalion or even regiment. You can be an Air Force. Second Continental Army of the Republic has an Air Force. Didn't know that, did you? We do have a few MiGs. We also have jet fighters. Didn't know that either, did you? But I won't tell you where or who flies them. I will tell you that we have them. You can have any kind of militia that you want, as long as it is for a legitimate military purpose and that it's spelled. You can't change yourself from infantry to armor to artillery every 3 weeks. You have to establish the unit as a specific type of unit and equip and train for that mission. You have to do that. Now I see a lot of people shaking their heads when I say you can be an artillery unit. It happens to be the truth. The Supreme Court has ruled on it. Anybody know the case? The case was where a guy was arrested for having a shotgun, parading around in public with it, and he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, stating that he was legally authorized to own that gun and that they couldn't take it away from him because he was in the militia. And the Supreme Court ruled that the shotgun was a weapon of the militia and that he was authorized to have, possess, use, and train with any weapon that is a proper weapon for a militia, including artillery for an artillery unit, armor for an armor unit, rifles for an infantry unit, etc. Didn't know that, did you? You got to read the law, folks. You got to study the law. The militia is iron-bound in this country. You really believe in your wildest dreams there would be any militia in this country if it was illegal? They would have come after us a long, long time ago, not just vilify us in the press. That's to try to discredit us in the eyes of the sheeple for the day when the fighting starts so that we won't have any popular support. That's really what that's all about. You see, because if the militia was unlawful, unconstitutional, and we were doing something wrong, they would have come after us a long time ago. And you're right, the war would have started then. So you see, there is a legal militia. There's a lawful militia. There's a constitutional militia. Most of the militias that you see in the public eye are not legitimate, lawful militia. Is a militia that says only Christians can belong to this militia and we're going to call ourselves the 4th Missouri Volunteer Christian Militia. Is that a militia? No, it's a religious army made up of religious members of some particular sect of Christianity as a whole, and if you don't believe in what they believe in, you're liable to end up fighting them, okay? A militia is a military organization, not a religious organization, and don't ever get the two confused. You can't go to a militia meeting and turn it into a prayer meeting. And you can't go to a prayer meeting and after you get through with the sermon, have a militia meeting. You cannot do it. You can go to a militia meeting and you can have a chaplain and you can ask the chaplain to say a prayer, and that's okay. But if you have one Jewish guy that doesn't like that and he wants to say a Jewish prayer, you better let him. You better let him, or you're not a militia. Understand that. Militia is to protect our freedom so that we can worship at the altar of our choice. It is not to dictate to us which religion or altar we're to worship at, or to say who can be a member of the militia based upon what their religious preference is. And anytime we get away from that, we are destroying freedom for all of us. Understand this, and understand it clearly. If I take away your freedom, I have taken away the freedom of everyone in this room. Everyone. And everyone who allows me to do it is complicit in that treason. Take away the rights of one, you have taken away the rights of all. Now we must have militias. If you don't belong to a militia, you need to join one. If you don't know where a militia is that you can join, form one. Advertise. You cannot do it in secret, you must do it in public. You do not have to have all of your activities publicly known, but you must be public. You must never talk to the press under any circumstances whatsoever, period, except when authorized by the commanding officer to issue a statement that has been pre-prepared to be delivered by the officer who has been appointed to be the public affairs officer, and he is to make no statement, answer no questions, only read what he has been given to read, and then shut his stupid mouth.
Arming of the militia is not left to the state but to the citizen. However, should the state choose to arm its citizen militia, it is free to do so, bearing in mind that the Constitution is not a document limiting the citizen, but rather limiting the power of government. But should the state fail to arm its citizen militia, the right of the people to keep and bear arms becomes the source of the guarantee that the state will not be found defenseless in the presence of a threat to its security. It makes no sense whatsoever to look to the Constitution of the United States or that of any state for permission to form a citizen militia, since logically the power to permit is also the power to deny. If brought to its logical conclusion in this case, government may deny the citizen the right to form a militia. If this were to happen, the state would assert itself as the principal of the contract, making the people the agents. Liberty then would depend on the state's grant of liberty. Such a concept is foreign to American thought. While the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution recognizes the existence of the state militia and recognizes their necessity for securing a free state, and while it also recognizes that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, the Second Amendment is not the source of the right to form a militia nor to keep and bear arms. Those rights existed in the states prior to the formation of the Federal Union. In fact, the right to form militia and to keep and bear arms exists from antiquity. The enumeration of those rights in the Constitution underscores their natural occurrence and importance. According to the 10th Amendment, ultimate power over the militia is not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution. Consequently, the power of the militia remains in the hands of the people. Again, the fundamental function of the militia in society remains with the people. Therefore, the Second Amendment recognizes that the militia's existence and the security of the state rests ultimately in the people, who volunteer their persons to constitute the militia and their arms to supply its firepower. The primary defense of the state rests with the citizen militia bearing its own arms. Fundamentally, it is not the state that defends the people, but the people who defend the state. The second line of defense of the state consists of a statutory organization known as the National Guard. Whereas the National Guard is solely the creation of statutory law, the militia derives its existence from the inherent inalienable rights which existed before the Constitution and whose importance are such that they merit specific recognition in that document. While the National Guard came into existence as the result of legislative activity, the militia existed before there was a nation or constitutional form of government. The militia, consisting of people owning and bearing personal weapons, is the very authority out of which the United States Constitution grew. This point must be emphasized. Neither the citizen's militia nor the citizen's private arsenal can be an appropriate subject of federal regulation. It was the armed militia of the American colonies whose own efforts ultimately led to the establishment of the United States of America. While some may say that the right to keep and bear arms is granted to Americans by the Constitution, just the opposite is true. The federal government itself is the child of the armed citizen. We, the people, are the parent of the child we call government. You, senators, are part of the child that we, the people, gave life to. The increasing amount of federal encroachment into our lives indicates the need for parental corrective action. In short, the federal government needs a good spanking to make it behave. One other important point needs to be made. Since the Constitution is the limiting document upon the government cannot become greater than the granting power. It is the servant of we, the people.
When should you shoot a cop? That question, even without an answer, makes most law-abiding taxpayers go into knee-jerk conniptions. The indoctrinated masses all race to see who can be first and loudest to proclaim that it is never okay to forcibly resist law enforcement. In doing so, they also inadvertently demonstrate why so much of human history has been plagued by tyranny and oppression. In an ideal world, cops would do nothing except protect people from thieves and attackers, in which case shooting a cop would never be justified. In the real world, however, far more injustice, violence, torture, theft, and outright murder has been committed in the name of law enforcement than has been committed in spite of it. To get a little perspective, try watching a documentary or two about some of the atrocities committed by the regimes of Stalin or Lenin or Chairman Mao or Hitler or Pol Pot or any number of other tyrants in history. Pause the film when the jackboots are just about to herd innocent people into the cattle cars or just about to gun them down as they stand on the edge of a ditch, and then ask yourself the question, when should you shoot a cop? Keep in mind the evils of those regimes were committed in the name of law. And as much as the statement may make people cringe, the history of the human race would have been a lot less gruesome if there had been a lot more cop killers around to deal with the state mercenaries of those regimes. Now, people don't mind when you point out the tyranny that has happened in other countries, but most have a hard time viewing their own country, their own government, and their own law enforcers in any sort of objective way. Having been trained to feel a blind loyalty to the ruling class of the particular piece of dirt they live on, also known as patriotism, and having been trained to believe that obedience is a virtue, the idea of forcibly resisting law enforcement is simply unthinkable to many. Literally, they can't even think about it. And humanity has suffered horribly because of it. It is a testament to the effectiveness of authoritarian indoctrination that literally billions of people throughout history have begged and screamed and cried in the face of authoritarian injustice and oppression, but only a tiny fraction have ever actually lifted a finger to try to stop it. Even when people can recognize tyranny and oppression, they still usually talk about working within the system, the same system that's responsible for the tyranny and the oppression. People want to believe that the system will, sooner or later, provide justice. The last thing they want to consider is that they should illegally resist, that if they want to achieve justice, they must become criminals and terrorists, which is what anyone who resists legal injustice is automatically labeled. But history shows all too well that those who fight for freedom and justice almost always do so illegally, i.e., without the permission of the ruling class. If politicians think that they have the right to impose any law they want, and cops have the attitude that as long as it's called law, they will enforce it, what is there to prevent complete tyranny? Not the consciences of the lawmakers or their hired thugs, obviously, and not any election or petition to the politicians. When tyrants define what counts as law, then by definition, it is up to the lawbreakers to combat tyranny. Pick any example of abuse of power, whether it's the fascist so-called war on drugs, the police thuggery that has become so common, the random stops and searches now routinely carried out in the name of security, such as at airports, border checkpoints that aren't even at the border, sobriety checkpoints, and so on, or any other example. Now ask yourself the uncomfortable question. If it's wrong for cops to do these things, doesn't that imply that the people have a right to resist such actions? And of course, state mercenaries don't take kindly to being resisted, even non-violently. If you question their right to detain you, interrogate you, search you, invade your home, and so on, you are very likely to be tasered, physically assaulted, kidnapped, put in a cage, or shot. If a cop decides to treat you like livestock, whether he does it legally or not, you will usually have only two options: submit or kill the cop. You can't resist a cop just a little and get away with it. He will always call in more of his fellow gang members until you are subdued or dead. Basic logic dictates that you either have an obligation to let law enforcers have their way with you, or you have the right to stop them from doing so, which will almost always require killing them. Politely asking fascists to not be fascists has a very poor track record throughout history. Consider the recent Indiana Supreme Court ruling, which declared that if a cop tries to illegally enter your home, it's against the law for you to do anything to stop him. Aside from the patent absurdity of it, since it amounts to giving thugs with badges permission to break the law, and makes it a crime for you to defend yourself against a criminal, if he has a badge, consider the logical ramifications of that attitude. There were once some words written on a piece of parchment, those words now known as the Fourth Amendment, that said that you have the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures at the hands of government agents. In Indiana today, what could that possibly mean? The message from the ruling class is quite clear and utterly insane. It amounts to this: we don't have the right to invade your home without probable cause, but if we do, you have no right to stop us, and we have the right to arrest you if you try. Why not apply that to the rest of the Bill of Rights while we're at it? You have the right to say what you want, but if we use violence to shut you up, you have to let us. I can personally attest to the fact that that is the attitude of the U.S. so-called Department of Justice. Or maybe, you have the right to have guns, but if we try to forcibly and illegally disarm you and you resist, we have the right to kill you. Ask Randy Weaver or the Branch Davidians about that one. You have the right to not testify against yourself, but when we coerce you into confessing and call it a plea agreement, you can't do a thing about it. What good is a right? What does the term right even mean if you have an obligation to allow jackboots to violate your so-called rights? It makes the term absolutely meaningless. To be blunt, if you have the right to do A, it means that if someone tries to stop you from doing A, even if he has a badge and a politician's scribble, sometimes called law, on his side, you have the right to use whatever amount of force is necessary to resist that person. That's what it means to have an unalienable right. If you have the unalienable right to speak your mind, a la the First Amendment, then if all else fails, you have the right to kill government agents who try to shut you up. If you have the unalienable right to be armed, then if all else fails, you have the right to kill government agents who try to disarm you. If you have the right to not be subjected to unreasonable searches and seizures, then if all else fails, you have the right to kill government agents who try to inflict those upon you. Those who are proud to be law-abiding don't like to hear this and don't like to think about this, but what's the alternative? If you do not have the right to forcibly resist so-called legal injustice, that logically implies that you have an obligation to allow government agents to do absolutely anything they want to you, your home, your family, your neighbors, and so on. Really, there are only two choices. You are a slave, the property of the politicians without any rights at all, or you have the right to violently resist government attempts to oppress you. There can be no other option. Of course, on a practical level, openly resisting the gang called government is usually very hazardous to one's health. But there's a big difference between obeying for the sake of self-preservation, which is often necessary and rational, and feeling a moral obligation to go along with whatever the ruling class wants to do to you, which is pathetic and insane. Most of the incomprehensible atrocities that have occurred throughout history were due in large part to the fact that most people answer never to the question of when should you shoot a cop. The correct answer is when evil is legal, become a criminal. When oppression is enacted as law, become a lawbreaker. And when those violently victimizing the innocent have badges, become a cop killer. So the next time you hear of a police officer being killed in the line of duty, take a moment to consider the very real possibility that maybe in that case, the law enforcer was the bad guy and the cop killer was the good guy. As it happens, that has been the case more often than not throughout human history.
In some old dusty attic, undisturbed for many years, there lies a tattered banner that is stained with blood and tears, by men who knew that freedom must be fought for by the free, and died to save a ragged flag that says, don't tread on me, don't tread on me. I'm a rattlesnake with diamonds on my back. When other men retreat, that's just the time that I attack. Because a dream that's worth defending is a dream that's bound to be a ragged flag that says, don't tread on me, don't tread on me.